So what we want to do first of all is to understand what we mean by risk. That's the important issue. There really isn't anything any of us do in our day-to-day lives that doesn't involve some aspect of risk, whether it's driving our car, whether it's eating food, restaurants or at home. Even for all of us, just opening our businesses and letting employees or customers in the front door has an element of risk to it. We all know that. We know all these things about driving, eating and running a business. So most of us would take reasonable steps to mitigate those risks. That would be a normal state of affairs. So we would abide by traffic rules, wear seat belts, take care when handling raw meat, not go and eat in a restaurant that had a 1 on their health ratings, etc. And we put in place systems to manage our business to try and mitigate that risk down as low as we can. But it's interesting when we talk about taking reasonable steps to mitigate risk. So, for example, the speed limit on a motorway is 70 miles an hour. Hands up, most of us would drive at more than 70 miles an hour. And we're probably going at 74, 76, maybe 79. Me personally, I set my speed limiter to 79. I think I'm okay, that I'm not going to get nabbed by the coppers if that happens. But I'm mitigating a risk of being caught for speeding, getting points on my license, etc. What I didn't realize until I'd done a bit of research is, and this will cheer you all up on a lovely afternoon, your risk of death from 70 mile an hour car accident to 80 miles an hour car accident is about 71% greater, a significantly greater risk from driving 10 miles an hour faster. So we might be thinking we're mitigating risks, but if you don't know the risks, you're not mitigating them properly. If you don't know that by driving 10 miles an hour faster, your risk of death is massively increased, then how are you mitigating that additional risk? So one of the things we're going to talk about is how do you know what those risks are in your business? So when we're talking about understanding risks, we can't avoid them. It's not possible to avoid all risks, because actually you just have to wrap yourself in cotton wool and stay in the house all day long. You cannot be successful really in any part of your life. Taking that decision to go and approach that attractive young girl when we were teenagers and ask her out at the risk of being rejected. We're all taking risks in different stages of our life and different parts of our life based on the circumstances of that time. Most 20-year-olds are much bigger risk takers than most 60-year-olds. In the business context, the important thing that we really need to understand is what risks are business critical, i.e. if that risk arises and it goes wrong, it's game over, and what risks are slightly annoying and going to cost us a little bit of money. But we can't run a business with no risks, because if your business, my business, if it was entirely risk-free, there'd be an awful lot more competition in our marketplaces. So risk is not a bad thing. It stops other people trying to get in the way of what we're doing. But we need to know what those risks are, understand the consequences, and then manage them as best we can. So smart risks are what create success. It's not avoiding risk, it's not running away from risk, it's understanding which risks are more likely to generate extra income or profit or value versus the small risk if they go wrong that you lose money or have a negative consequence. It's about managing risks and picking the right horses to back, so to speak. If you take no risks, then even if you win, you don't win anything. We've all got to have money on the table and take risks to be able to generate greater returns in the future. So what are the risks in your business, in my business? I've tried not to be too specific to construction. We'll talk about some of your issues, but what are the risks in your business? Whilst there are unique things to your business, your employees, your customer base, your geographic location, there are a few common areas that we would all need to understand. Probably, I would say one of the big ones that people worry about, it is something that keeps most of my clients awake at night, is this employment risk. The minute you take on an employee, then you become responsible for them when they're in your workplace. That's health and safety. Is it a safe place to work? You all understand in construction, it's a dangerous place to work, and therefore risks of somebody not wearing a hard hat are much higher than in my office, where the worst case is probably a paper cut. The risks are different depending on your environment. But also we have a responsibility to look after their well-being, and that in the last 2 years has become a much greater issue, managing stress and pressure and other impacts on them. And of course an obligation to handle payroll issues, pension issues, health and safety issues, all the regulatory issues that come along the minute you employ a single person, put you at risk as the person of responsibility on top of the business to make sure you're doing all those things properly. The second thing is you have some risk in terms of your dealings with the public, public liability. If somebody comes onto your premises or uses your products or is in a building you have created, then you are assuming some liability for their safety and their well-being and the consequences of failure on your part. If you don't build it safely and it falls down, that is a problem for you. And for some businesses, it depends on your advice. For our business, for example, if we give tax advice and it turns out to be wrong, it's not just a question of give clients their money back. It's they may be out of pocket for significant amounts of tax, and we may be liable for that extra tax they have to pay. So for all of us, this liability is both a physical liability. If people walk into our premises, we have a responsibility to keep them safe, but also a financial responsibility to make sure the products we build or sell or provide do what they say they would do, and there are consequences if it doesn't. And then finally, there's a compliance risk for every business. That's whether it's tax collections, PAYE, VAT, product quality, health and safety, environmental issues. There is a raft of regulatory pressures on every business to make sure you're complying with the rules, and to break those rules might be a slap on the wrist and a fine, could be imprisonment. It's a very rare thing, but there was a big case of the Hatfield train disaster where a train crashed and senior people in the organization went to prison because it was regarded as their failure to ensure proper controls on the quality of the work that was being done to the railway lines. So big consequences if we don't get some of our basic compliance issues right. Now, those issues apply to almost every business in slightly different mixes and slightly different priorities. And of course, there are unique ones to your business and to your industry. What are the business risks for you? All of these areas are things where you need to be thinking about potential risk. You want to be compliant with the rules. It's difficult because the rules change all the time and there are lots of them. And you therefore have to put in steps to manage and reduce those risks. So having internal systems and rules and regulations and signs about, wear your hard hat and your goggles and all that kind of stuff. They're all the kind of things we put in place to try and mitigate that risk. You might also put in place people. So if you employ a lot of people, a HR manager who's more up to speed on the HR regulations, make sure that you comply. You probably have health and safety people who are responsible for making sure you comply with those bits. So we can buy in either externally or by recruiting people to take specific responsibilities for specific parts of your business. So there are lots of things you can do. What I really want to focus on for this session, because there's only a limited amount of time that we have to be able to deal with this, is the financial risk of your business, where it could go wrong in terms of numbers, where it could go wrong in terms of financial consequence for you as an individual, losing the wealth that you spent a long time building up.